Welcome to the Kynective Media Podcast, and I'm your host, Jules Nadalin. Today, Patrick Fejer from B+H Architects joins us to explore the intersection of architecture, human experience, and what it takes to design in a rapidly changing world. Greg, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today on the Kynective Media Podcast. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Fantastic. Yeah. Looking forward to this.
Looking forward to. So we're mixing things up today at the Kynective Media Podcast. I'd like to first off welcome Greg, my co-host. We're co-hosting today. So Greg, give our wonderful listeners and viewers a little bit about you and how you're involved
well, this
today.
This is my first time on the podcast, and I work with Jules extensively. I mean, we created this podcast together, so I'm really excited to be on it for the first time. And I'm on it because we're talking to my my good friend who I've worked with and colleague who I've worked with for, oh God, how many decades on various projects, and really excited to have a conversation about architecture. It's been one of the things that I've worked adjacently in for many years in wayfinding and experiential design and exhibitions. So yeah, really excited to be here.
Great. And that just set up everything for me. Thanks, Greg. Patrick, welcome. Greg stole my thunder. Thank you for joining us today. And congratulations on your long-term work relationship. Do you want to briefly share a little bit about yourself as well for all our listeners and viewers who may not know about you?
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And as Greg had mentioned, I am an architect currently with B+H Architects that has been kind of based out of Toronto for a long period of time. And I play a role of leading the design team as well as really forging relationships with clients and helping in terms of building the business. And we are part of a larger group called the SJ Group, and our clients and teams are spread across the globe, and it's a great opportunity. Love what I do, and absolutely delighted to be here.
Thank you again for taking the time. We really appreciate it. You sort of touched upon one of my first questions. B+H is known worldwide, and I think one of the things that you focus on is excellence. So how do you define design excellence in today's world?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, it's kind of funny when you talk about architecture and you talk about design, is that we can almost identify what doesn't work faster than what is good design. So a lot of architects like to flip that on its head. Well, good design is the absence of bad design, but it is, as we know, design is a process. And sometimes when we get to the more simple things, the things like why didn't we think about that first? Like there's all these sort of signs that when you get into a huddle with other designers that are kind of like, I think we're there, or you've pushed it too far, that one more step makes it either too complicated or too ambiguous. But there's definitely an essence. I think it's a big part of being in a design leadership role, is really being able to understand the client, the team, and where you are. And then it's like, when are we done? Of course, architecture being slightly different than art, the client factor, the cost factor, these are other things that will drive whether you're actually done in terms of arriving at that moment, that aha moment that, wow, this is good design, or this is design excellence. But we try to also categorize that, in terms of whether it's our strategy team looks at what would be the drivers within a project for good design. And there'd be a whole inventory from journey mapping and the user experience to what are the sustainable targets? Is this project really regenerative? Is it, what's its contribution to community? So when we dig deeper, we do have sort of the checklists and ways of seeing where it makes it. But intuitively, there is that sort of gut where it's like, yeah, that works. And I think when you've had a lot of experience, I'm sure Greg can speak to this as well, when you realize, well, it is your intuition tells you, yeah, we're hitting all the marks. And then, as a result,
But then
that
there's
equals excellence. Yeah.
but then there's the X factor of the human side, because human behavior always wins, and we can make all the assumptions in the world, but you're talking about in terms of what is success. Sometimes just the way we think people are going to interact with a space doesn't play out as it did in our imaginations during the design process, right? I mean, that's one of the huge question marks, is what's actually going to happen when it goes quote unquote live, right?
That's the neatest thing. I think that's what's sort of neat about architecture. Although, like, you have film directors and architects in terms of, who are the heavyweights of the arts, let's say, and, everyone has their own experiences and they engage with the physical space differently. Like you said, it's like, wow, we never imagined that people would go and hang out in that particular, like,
you could build a pathway, you could build a corridor, you could build a pathway and just watch nobody use it,
yeah,
and crawl over something else to get to somewhere that seems completely like, I think,
yeah,
why are they doing this, or why didn't we think of this? So I think one of the big difficulties and challenges is the in testing and measuring, because until you actually see how people use a space, how a range of humans interact with an environment, we're all guessing, right? All we can use is our past experience and our intuition, but at the end of the day, we're making a best guess. But until you release the public into a space, you don't really know.
exactly. Yeah,
I literally was about to ask like what the human impact on architecture is. You guys have gone rogue on me. Like I should just leave. I'm going to leave now. You don't need me. And I was going to ask about the impact of real people and how you consider the human experience in your work and how they shape the direction and how it shapes how people work and live in the environment. I don't know if you want to expand on it because you sort of started the topic already. I don't know if that's going to have a little bit of a light bulb moment with those questions of how, human beings impact architecture.
I think that is one of the more exciting or rewarding aspects of what we do is when it becomes tangible, somehow tectonic. And we talk a lot about like evidence-based design, or trying to like come up with some authority that like we know what is going to happen. I think we've got a lot of tools that we can use to track that human experience. I mean, for us, we went through a bit of a rebranding, or looked at being bold and human with B+H, and the original founders of the firm. We realized when we engage with our staff was really like, what does it mean to be human, and how do we, whether it's the interior design team, or the architects, what is it that design, allows to have those opportunities or those hap chance encounters that allow for experiences to be made. So it's not that straight corridor. Is it one defined edge, and then something that has, a little bit more on the fringe to allow for the unexpected to happen within architecture. And I think that's what's
Do you start with trying to define what you want the human experience to be as a foundational in the terms of the project? When you sit down and say, we're going to create this, now we first need to define what we want the human experience to be of the space before you even start to imagine its shape and form and spatial relationships and all of that?
Yeah, I think one of the things when we start off a project is obviously defining the user or the purpose or the actual function of the building. But I think, how do you elevate that experience for that, that particular use that one would have? Is it something that is integrated in terms of biophilia and blurring the outdoor and indoor experience? So whether, dealing with the workplace or whether you're dealing with an aspect of hospitality. I mean, hospitality and residential are interesting because you're taking um, it's a snapshot of someone's whole day from getting up to actually falling asleep and what could happen within a residential unit or a hotel.
It's more all encompassing in terms of lives versus, just very short interactions or daily within a certain number of hours versus the place that people live
Yeah,
or stay for an extended period of time. So it's a lot more touch points.
exactly. And those touch points are key in terms of even in workplace, that how do you push for engagement and those encounters within the workplace? How do you elevate that? Because obviously things like workplace are challenged with the return to work in certain parts of the world. So yeah,
Mm.
I think it really is, you kind of map out that journey experience of what would be typical and how do you make it atypical? And how do you sort of balance, hospitality is a degree of escapism and fantasy. Could work be somewhat like that as well to lure people back to the office? And yeah.
How have you found the success of the hoteling approach to office space? The non-defined workspace where it's just like an open environment and people find their desk and find their space on a daily basis. How have you found the success of that?
I would say mixed. There's definitely something we kind of move from hoteling from to agile workplace. But I think at the end, people like to have this sort of assignment of place in some capacity.
They're territorial.
Yeah, right.
Like
It's very territorial.
what
And
I mean, what I found with those spaces is that people will come in earlier and earlier to claim their spot before anybody else can. And it's the same spot every day.
exactly.
Are you seeing any shifts in design with the back to work from clients? Are they still going to that open concept?
It was kind of interesting because the open concept was really based on can we use benching? Can we increase the population in the workplace areas and then reward people with an abundance of amenity spaces? So let's have pool table, let's have ping pong, let's have
Basketball.
right,
Yeah.
a basketball or a sandbox, or we could have an obstacle course that we have people on tricycles running through the office. Like there were all these kind of things to somehow do a little bit of the gamify of the workplace. But in actuality, what we hear more from staff is like, hey, I want to go to work, but at the end of the day, if I want to hang out with friends and take a moment, I want to do it outside the office. It's not to say I want to hang out with people from work or have those discussions. So, I mean, it is kind of different in terms of what office environment you are in. Maybe in more of a creative aspect. Although I know with architects, there's usually quite a bit of pressure with that. That again, wanting to spend time doing those amenity activities. I think it gets.
But you have to get the work done.
Yeah.
You have to actually sit down and be able to focus. I mean, creative or any industry, anything where you're actually doing work.
Yeah.
There has to be a certain opportunity to focus. Otherwise, your productivity will be terrible.
Exactly.
I think that comes back to the whole question of user experience, where we all imagined that if we created these amazing open undefined spaces full of a playground, that somehow it would improve the work environment and increase productivity. And I'm not sure it did.
Yeah, exactly. Or did it really increase bonding relationships with colleagues? Like really having a great conversation over lunch in a canteen cafeteria that doesn't look like a cafeteria, but has moments where people could sit and there's different, you choreograph the space to have different seating arrangements in that kind of area. It could be more conducive to being like, creating those bonds opposed to playing pinball or other things.
When we're talking about, you work in different spaces. We've touched upon residential. We've touched upon commercial. are clients coming to you nowadays with a clearer ideas, or do you find there's more uncertainty? Is there like a mix when clients are coming to you?
Wow, that's a great question. I think with everything that's going on in the world, there definitely is a degree of uncertainty, and an architect can provide, you know, maybe another opinion to help inform that world around us. But as any architect that says I know what's going on, or I can predict the future, is, that sort of, we have to project a degree of confidence, but in actuality, we're, navigating through the murky waters in the same way. I do think that, with sort of the commercial aspects, the performer understanding what a developer's business plan is more than ever important, I think, for architects in general to understand. I mean, I think it is definitely, we have clients that'll come to us really prescriptive of what the program is, they have an understanding of what the zoning, they've done their homework, they've probably talked to planners, whereas before, sometimes we have clients like, I've got a site, what can we do on it? Let's brainstorm. And those days
Those must be fun projects.
Yeah, those don't happen as often, right? These are obviously bigger investments. There's a lot of other entities, consulting companies that are also in the realm. And, from a lending perspective and making sure they can raise money for their development, they want to, be quite responsible. So I think, to answer your question, Jules, it's a little bit more prescribed in terms of what they would like in terms of the program, but the creativity is that translation of that program, and how does that affect, the spaces and the materiality, but they're definitely a little bit more prescriptive.
Do you find, because there's quite a timeline from the first conversation in the office, like we're going to, well, first of all, master plan, design, build, construct, open, all of that. Things change so fast and accelerating that, do you find that time from the initial germ of the idea to actually being able to build and open the building, that so much has changed, where just the factor of time it drives?
Yeah, absolutely. Like even under construction and if it's a private sector building that has to be leased or sold, or residential, for instance, a condo building, that duration or that timeline of the project, can we shift from a condo building to a rental building? Can we convert the residents
or an office building
into an office, or into, we did a project in China that I think it was initially conceived as being a hotel, and it ended up being an office building in the end. And you had to do that on the fly. Less so, it doesn't happen as much, but there are things like, I remember working on, way back in the day, the Staples Center in Los Angeles, that we had a series of major, not to get too micro, but a series of major transfer beams that would be the marshalling area where all the trucks for concerts and staging areas would all be, and it had to be a column-free space. And the steel was coming from Luxembourg, which is kind of interesting because that's where Trump has gotten his steel for the new White House ballroom, which is
which isn't being built anymore.
Yeah, which is a big controversy because America makes a lot of steel. But what had happened was, we worked with PCL on that project, and it was so schedule focused that we had the steel for the steel beams that would support this caught up in the Panama Canal. Like there was an issue. It meant it would be 6 weeks late. So we had to switch the design, working with our structural engineer, to 8-foot by 8-foot post-tension concrete beam. So these are just
Oh my God.
massive structural changes that happen because you got to react to, the market that
That's
you're
also
working in.
way bigger. So
Yeah.
the real estate that each of those things take
Yeah.
up, I mean, it changes everything.
And other things that would be drivers for that particular project was they could sell the suites at such a high rate. They decided to add a whole nother level of suites while we're under construction, which changed the air volume of the arena, all the egress capacities. So that's when architects have to go into overdrive, work with the contractor and consultants, and yeah.
Do you sometimes feel like somebody takes a large bag of balls and just throws it down a hill and you're chasing them?
Many times. You have to know what each ball is, right? There's the time, right? The time factor.
Do you throw some of them back is what I want to know.
Yeah, there are cases where you're in meetings with clients and it's like, we can't afford this project. And it's like, well, what do you mean you can't afford the project? Well, it's more than what our budget allowed. And there's certain things in a budget, like
Or have I heard that before?
building the infrastructure to support the project, that the economies of scale in the project, you're investing too much to either decontaminate the site or build a bridge over a TTC tunnel, that the numbers don't work in terms of what a typical project would be. So you either, scale back, but usually when you scale back area, that's a loss in revenue generating space. So you actually, one of the challenges I remember being with a client was being asked, how do you explain yourselves and all the consultants, this project is over budget and what do you want to do? And I had to, kind of sit up straight and tell the client, hey, you know what we got to do? We got to make it bigger. And they're like, whoa.
That's great. I love it.
That took a lot of nerve.
I remember that.
Right? It's like, you got to make it bigger. What? You mean we're like this much over and you're telling us to make it bigger? And I said, well, that's
Spend more.
right. That's the only way that you can use those economies of scale to pay for that infrastructure, whatever it might be, is to have more meat on the bone to be able to make the project overall more successful. So I think having a bit of business sensibility and thinking as an entrepreneur is one of those things that you need to have, I think,
So
in architecture.
it's a lot more than just about designing buildings. There's so many moving pieces.
Right. And that's sort of where the sort of stigma of just trying to make things look pretty is, doesn't do the profession any kind of justice, right? There's a lot more.
I mean, going back to your reference of things being caught in the Panama Canal, like I'm sure that with our current state of the world, you're getting so much disruption in projects with supply and demand and materials and stuff like that. Do you find that's the case right now?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, usually with having a footprint that's global, you could respond to things kind of regionally. If things were slow in one region, things might be busy in another. And I think it's kind of the first time that we're seeing that disruption, Jules, that you mentioned is kind of happening everywhere. So the supply and demand and construction impact to the Toronto market, there are things from still dealing with exclusions to the foreign buyer, finance rates and stuff, which are, really impact the private sector. And it's just a general feeling of uncertainty, what's going to happen next, right? We hear all about, are we at the bottom yet, or is it still yet to come? But even, with everything that's going on in the Middle East, it is definitely something where, we were working on a lot of hospitality related projects in the Middle East, in Saudi. But yeah, most of them had stopped. Some are still going. And, it was a tough, I was even looking at traveling at that time. We had team members that were in the Middle East when the tension kind of happened. But it's a lot of those projects are all on the basis that things, from a hospitality perspective, attracting the North American tourist, that somehow now that's been shaken, and that kind of like comfort level might not be there. And is that does that cycle, Greg, as you've talked from start to finish, can sort of the confidence level be boosted over 3 or 4 years while we finish design and actually build these, or has it left a permanent, mark of concern that people won't want it to travel to that part of the world? So we're navigating that, at all scales of different projects.
Yeah, and when I have to say that when I was in Saudi Arabia I guess 2 years ago, I was absolutely blown away by the sophistication of design and the user experience, like in terms of the human factor of the spaces they were creating, was some of the best I've seen anywhere.
For sure.
In Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean, you have the world's best architects all collaborating and competing, but for massive commissions, like what they've done in Abu Dhabi.
And money to build the dream, right?
Exactly. Many firms have invested almost 60-70% of their workload in the Middle East, and that's a challenge for them now.
So, Greg, when the world comes into a little bit more of a balanced spectrum, you're taking me on a vacation there, so I can check out all the hospitality that Patrick's been working on.
I got to tell you, you go to a place like Alula, it is hands down the best hospitality curated guest experience I have ever seen. It is multi-sensory, it is all encompassing, it is beginning to end, and it's a really sophisticated and understated and beautiful. I was not expecting that level of experience. So yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Great. Patrick, when we're talking about managing disruptors and things that are challenging and advances in the industry, and AI has been impacting the world of architecture and your industry, how's it showing up today? Do you find it's a useful tool right now in the state of new changes and instability?
I think you nailed it in terms of referring to it as a tool. I think definitely it's helping us, in different ways or different points within, our workflows that we actually have. I'm not sure whether it's helping us as much in terms of, navigating the outside disruptors. And of course, AI as a whole is seen as a bit of how is that going to impact architecture. I mean, for us, a lot of things that we were experimenting with when we look at form making and parametric modeling and writing scripts, a lot of that now can be done so quickly in AI that's actually made that aspect made us a lot more effective in terms of using the AI tools for that, in terms of upfront visualization, and we call it provocations, in terms of like how to come up with something, not necessarily a hallucination, but something that can generate ideas or a feel that might not necessarily be entirely site specific or project specific, but can be sort of shared.
Do you use AI for behavioral modeling for the experiential aspect of your projects?
I mean, that's something definitely we would like to get into. I mean, there are aspects where people are looking at emotional responses to spaces.
Mm-hmm.
But Jules, as well, like there's spec writing, there's code analysis, where we thought the more detailed planning aspects of doing construction documentation, AI would actually take that production work and try to help facilitate that more. That actually hasn't been the case as much as we had sort of predicted. It's more in the conceptual realm where we fall in terms of getting our messaging, understanding, its impact, of course, on admin related things and Copilot and helping with really kind of storyboarding. I think that's been super helpful right now. When it gets into, from going from the LLM to more of how do we deploy agents to do more work for us and larger workflows and giving bundles of tasks. I think that that is definitely going to be a huge impact. But I think it's all positive, right? It's going to allow us. It's not like we're going to become unbusy. It's going to make us. We're just going to be able to focus our attention on, you know, evaluating the different permutations that AI allows us to do. So in the end, it really helps, to make the design more informed. The client and the ultimate user gets to benefit that. Like I would like to have, any kind of data that we can get from a post occupancy. How does that start to inform our design? Like not to be, and that kind of can be a slippery slope in terms of touching on privacy issues. But Greg, going back to you said about like, you never really know how people use the space. We can
That's what I was asking with the modeling.
document it. Maybe that can help us in terms of finding those discoveries or being able to have those not necessarily staged, but more opportunities for great spaces in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing with AI though, it's sort of the center of everything technology. It's where all the investment is and everything. But the one thing with architecture, I guess, is the verification, because AI does make the occasional mistake. And AI makes assumptions, and AI has biases based on the inputs. So I guess there's also a risk of letting AI take too much of the reins, because they could, right? Because you have to verify in terms of the outcomes that it's determining.
Yeah, and I think you always need, that individual, the architect in this particular case, to somehow curate, mediate, understand, what makes that connection to the client, right? And the idea of prompts and making sure that, how in the end are things actually evaluated to make sure that they're impactful. And there's it's funny how we talk about human intelligence, because it's like, intelligence was intelligence. You're always talking about like that was, hey, it was human intelligence. But now we're trying to talk about what are the benefits of, we're talking about the cultural response, emotional response to form and space, and in getting to your clients and what the drivers are. So it is, there's an intuition that like architecture is always going to have to be somehow placed into that middle ground to, capture vision and basically be able to direct its implementation, working with contractors or others to make it somehow real. But things now might evolve into digital spaces as much as physical ones.
But I think AI also has again, if it's used effectively as a tool, could also fundamentally change what we know as architecture. We've been building rectangular boxes with, variations and obviously breaking out of that a bit. But this sort of foundational rectangular box for humans, maybe AI is going, when it really looks at creating spaces around a particular purpose and for a particular audience, maybe that's going to change, because it kind of doesn't follow the rules that we've been following, right? It's starting from a blank piece of paper. It's like, what if you created a space for A, B, and C to do, this or that? What would it look like? And using that as a foundation of design, I think it could fundamentally change what we see as buildings.
And, I'd like to resonate that. I'm going back to what I always say. It's a tool. We never need to take away the human impact, especially with design. And that being said, is there anything else you want to share, Patrick, about the human impact in design before we wrap up this podcast? And one of the final questions I'm going to ask you is how people can connect with you if they want to know a little bit more. But what's your last takeaway on this conversation with the human impact on design?
I think the human impact, will always be there. And I think that the AI, it's seen as a disruptor, but it is a lot of negative stigma associated with it. But I think to Greg's point, like the opportunities in terms of how we can harness that power and what that can do in terms of the built realm and how that translates, obviously construction and how we build that or implement it from, I mean, we see buildings that are 3D printed, we see buildings that are poured with, with concrete, the sort of complexities in form that we could have is unbelievable. But instead of having, there has to be a rationale or a human component for us to understand why or appreciate that. A space that, doesn't have a rationale. If you think if I were to crush an aluminum can and imagine ourselves being inside of it, what for, or what we're just almost making a world that is, mimicking a natural world. But, there has to be an explanation. That design rationale and is, I think, what's the story behind it? What are the connotations? Why the selection of materiality? Why does it have that filigree, or why does it filter light? What was the inspiration for that? And I think that human component, that story is really what allows individuals to appreciate and connect with that particular space, or it just becomes form for form's sake. And that doesn't necessarily create a connection. And also the programmatic elements in terms of what happens in that space. How do we get people to come back a second time, want to meet there? So, I don't think we've figured out that, Jules, that formula of what makes human. We know we've had certain successes in terms of where that works and where it doesn't work. But imagine if we could use AI really to, again, to harness that.
Harness that. Yeah. The question is, has AI been able to invent transparent aluminum yet?
Yeah, things like that. No, but like imagine, materials that change.
It's a Star Trek reference, but anyway.
Well,
okay. You guys are going rogue again.
Yeah. Sorry. No, I mean,
no, it's fine. I knew this was going to happen. But Patrick,
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. We'll blame Greg. If someone wants to continue this conversation with you on design and the human impact or AI impact, we're going to add this in the show notes. What's the best way for them to connect with you or B+H?
Oh, they could reach out via email, call, any platform, LinkedIn, but you can, I'd love to communicate with those that are interested in that subject matter and what could be. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we'll do our best to help continue that conversation offline. And I just want to thank you both for your time and this amazing conversation. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do it again.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Kynective Media Podcast. And a big thank you for Patrick from B+H Architects for joining us. And a shout out to Greg for co-hosting. If you want to connect with Patrick, remember you can get all his info and details in the show notes. And remember to keep staying connected and telling the stories that matter.